They told you freedom comes at 65, that if you grind through your youth, sacrifice your passions, obey the structure, and play your part, you will one day be free. Free to travel, free to rest, free to finally live. Retirement, they called it, the grand reward for a lifetime of obedience. But what if I told you that freedom was never the plan, that retirement is not liberation but sedation, not the summit but the soft burial of your will? You see, the herd is not controlled by chains, it is controlled by promises, the promise of someday, the illusion that life is just one more promotion away, one more decade, one more sacrifice. Nietzsche once wrote, "The most common lie is the lie one tells to oneself, and the most devastating lie we've accepted is that freedom is something earned through obedience. You don't work your way to freedom, you conform your way to decay." This is the lie that fuels the modern machine, the lie that keeps you waking up to alarms you didn't set, performing tasks you didn't choose, for rewards you were told to want. It is the soul-deep illusion that life begins later, after the grind, after the sacrifice, after they say you're finally allowed to live. But retirement is not a beginning, it is an ending disguised as celebration. It is not a doorway, it is a ceiling. A polite dismissal from the stage, applauded by those who have forgotten they too are waiting in line. This is the great seduction Nietzsche warns us about, the rise of the last man, the one who no longer strives to overcome himself, but seeks only comfort. He does not rebel, he waits, he does not rise, he retires. And what do we tell him? Be patient, stay the course, one day you'll be free, but that day never arrives. Because the system was never built to make you free, it was built to make you useful and to discard you once your usefulness fades. You were told to climb the ladder, but no one told you the ladder is leaning against a wall that leads nowhere. You were told there is peace at the top, but when you arrive there's only silence and confusion, wrapped in beachfront brochures and hollow congratulations. The machine doesn't liberate you, it consumes you. It doesn't teach you how to live, it trains you how to function. You are not prepared for life, you are prepared to serve. And when the machine is done with you, it hands you a gold watch, a pension plan, and a story about freedom, just convincing enough to keep you from asking why you feel so empty. That's the brilliance of the illusion. It doesn't chain you, it convinces you to chain yourself. It teaches you to worship later, and by the time later arrives, you're too tired, too numb, or too lost to know what to do with it. Nietzsche once said, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded," and that's the quiet tragedy of the obedient life. You may gain comfort, but you lose the capacity to command your soul. Most will never question this, not because they agree, but because questioning takes courage, because rebellion takes energy, because silence, though hollow, feels safe. They will call obedience maturity, they will call sedation peace, they will call the end freedom. But you were not born to be tamed, you were not built to serve comfort, you were not created to die waiting. So the real question is not when you will retire, the real question is, will you ever start living? Retirement doesn't just end your career, it ends your identity. For decades, you were a title, a role, a function. You were a manager, a teacher, an engineer. You were someone in the eyes of the system because you were useful. But once the meetings stop, once the deadlines vanish, and the inbox goes silent, who are you? This is the part no one warns you about, the quiet death that follows the final paycheck. Not a death of the body, but of the self. Because when your value has always been tied to your output, what remains when there's nothing left to produce? When every hour of your life was accounted for, monetized, justified, what do you do with an hour that belongs only to you? Most people don't know, they've never had to ask, they were taught to be functional, not free. Nietzsche called this the morality of the slave, where identity is inherited, not created, where worth is measured by how well you serve, not how deeply you exist. You obey the structure, and the structure tells you who you are. And so when the structure dissolves, so does the self. This is why depression spikes after retirement, not because people lack money, but because they lack meaning. They've followed the script for so long, they've forgotten how to improvise. The mask they wore for 40 years becomes their only face. and when it's removed, there's nothing underneath but silence. A silence that should feel like freedom, but instead feels like loss. Because if you've never created yourself, then losing the role feels like death, a slow erasure of the person you thought you were. And this is the ultimate betrayal. You spent your life performing, producing, pleasing, and now the performance is over. But you were never taught how to simply be. You were taught how to serve, but never how to live. So when the applause ends and the curtain falls, you're not liberated. You're lost. And in that stillness, a darker question rises. If your identity was always attached to your utility, were you ever really a person at all, or just a function waiting to expire? Most never find the answer because they never knew they had to ask. You weren't raised, you were programmed. From the moment you could walk, you were placed on a track, told to sit still, speak only when spoken to, memorize what you're told, raise your hand for permission. You didn't grow, you adapted. This was not education, it was obedience training. Nietzsche warned of this quiet death. The surest way to corrupt a youth is to instruct him to hold in higher esteem those who think alike than those who think differently. You were never taught to think differently, you were taught to follow, to strive for grades, approval, promotion, external signals of worth measured not by inner truth, but outer compliance. And so the machine did its job. It broke your wildness, replaced curiosity with curriculum, replaced instinct with instruction, and slowly, silently, you began to trade your inner voice for the one that came from above. The system didn't just want your labor, it wanted your spirit. Not to destroy it, but to domesticate it, to mold it into something predictable, profitable, safe. And once you were molded, you were assigned a function. You became a cog in the wheel, not because you chose it, but because you didn't know there was an alternative. Work became your identity, routine became your reality, and over time you stopped asking why, you just kept going because everyone else was doing it. That's the trap. When an entire society is marching in the same direction, questioning the rhythm feels insane. You begin to mistake movement for meaning, but you're not living, you're operating. Every system, school, job, even religion, was engineered to keep you within the boundaries of the herd. You were rewarded for staying in line, punished for standing out, and you called it success? But Nietzsche would call it spiritual sedation. You weren't born to be standardized, yet your entire life was broken into measurable units. GPA, credit score, job title, net worth. You became a collection of data points, a record of compliance, a summary of how well you fit into a structure designed to use you. And worst of all, you started to believe this was your identity, when the truth is it was your mask. The system doesn't need you to be free, it needs you to be functional. The second you question your role, you threaten the whole design, and that's why rebellion is punished, not with violence, but with isolation. To live freely is to live outside the script, and that scares the machine. Because a person who does not need validation cannot be controlled. A person who thinks for themselves cannot be marketed to. A person who chooses meaning over measurement becomes dangerous. And so the system trains you not to awaken, but to wait, to delay your dreams, to defer your joy, to believe that real life starts someday, after the degree, after the job, after the retirement. But someday is a lie. And the machine knows it, because the longer you wait for freedom, the less you'll remember what freedom ever felt like. What happens when the role ends but the self was never formed? You wake up in the silence you spent decades earning and realize you have no idea what to do with it. There are no meetings, no calendars, no demands, just open space. And for the first time, that space doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like death. Not a physical one, but a spiritual one. The quiet death of someone who lived by routine and now stands in the ruins of their schedule, unsure who they are without it. Nietzsche understood this collapse. When the old gods die, when the roles dissolve and no new meaning rises to replace them, what remains is nihilism, a soul without direction, a life without center. And so many fall into this void. They don't collapse from poverty, but from purposelessness. They don't suffer because they're tired, but because they're empty. They lived for function, and now that function has ended. But the system doesn't grieve them, it simply reinvents their role. You're no longer a worker, now you are a consumer. The machine doesn't release you, it rebrands you. It sells you the next illusion. Retirement is no longer the absence of duty, it's the beginning of another script. One filled with beach homes, cruises, insurance plans, golf memberships, and endless advertisements reminding you this is what freedom looks like. But it isn't freedom, it's commerce. A lifestyle curated for those who once obeyed, now carefully transitioned into buyers of a fantasy. A system designed to profit from your longing. It sells you relaxation because it knows you fear stillness. It sells you packages because you've forgotten how to design your own life. Even in your supposed liberation, you're being guided, softly, invisibly, not with rules, but with suggestions, not with chains, but with options. So many options you stop realizing you're still being steered. This is the new obedience. Retirement doesn't break the pattern, it completes it. It is the final illusion that after decades of being shaped by the system, you are now free to enjoy yourself. But you were never shown how, and that's not an accident. The system was never built to awaken you, it was built to manage you. So instead of facing the abyss and finding yourself, you buy something, you schedule something, you distract yourself from the truth that's been waiting for you all along. You were not prepared for freedom, you were prepared for consumption. Nietzsche once said, "What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal, but you were taught to chase the goal and ignore the bridge." Now, in your final years, you wonder if you ever crossed anything at all. And that's the quiet tragedy. You didn't retire from the machine. You retired into it. And the machine is still running, only now it runs on your silence. You were told to wait, not directly, not with malice, but with repetition so subtle it became truth. When you graduate, when you get the job, when you get promoted, when the mortgage is paid, when you retire, then you can finally live. And so you waited, through your youth, through your prime, through the very years you were meant to burn with fire. You postponed your joy for the fantasy of someday. But someday never arrives, because you were trained to delay, not to live. This wasn't just culture, it was conditioning. Behavioral psychologists call it delayed discounting, the tendency to undervalue the present in favor of imagined future rewards. But Nietzsche saw something deeper, not just a psychological glitch, but a cultural sickness, a spiritual numbness disguised as discipline. He wrote, "Man in his pride created God in his own image, and then he created retirement to replace heaven, deferred salvation." You were taught that peace lies ahead, just over the next hill. But every hill revealed another. Every goal achieved only fed the hunger for another. The present became a holding cell, not a place to live, but to prepare. And that's the tragedy. You became an expert in preparation, in endurance, in waiting. But you never learned to arrive. You built spreadsheets, not memories. You earned respect, not presence. You optimized your time, but never felt time itself. And now, the world tells you to enjoy your reward. But how? You were never trained to be present, only to be productive. You were taught to count minutes, not inhabit them. So when you finally stop, when there are no more deadlines, no more alarms, no more quotas, you don't feel liberated, you feel disoriented, because stillness was never your natural state. You were conditioned to believe that rest must be earned, that joy must be scheduled, that life comes later. But life never comes later. It is always now, always slipping, always happening in the breath you ignore while chasing the next one. Nietzsche warned that the greatest danger is not pain, but numbness, not chaos, but comfort that lulls you into sleep while calling itself success. He asked us to imagine living the same life over and over again, eternal recurrence. And then to ask ourselves, if I had to relive this day, this life exactly as it is, would I call it worth living? For most, the answer is no, because most lives are built not on fire, but on fear, the fear of risk, the fear of deviation, the fear of now. And so we trade reality for plans, we chase a horizon that always moves. But you cannot postpone the soul. You cannot save aliveness for retirement. You either feel now or you never feel at all. Every time you say later, you gamble with something that may never come back. Energy, curiosity, passion, time. You've delayed long enough. The question now is not, what's next? The question is, what have you already lost by waiting? So what now? When the myths have shattered, when the routine is gone, when the mask has slipped and there's no script left to follow, what remains? A terrifying thing, choice. And for most, that's the moment of paralysis. Because freedom isn't comforting, it's chaos. It demands something the system never taught you: self-creation. Nietzsche once said, "Freedom is the will to be responsible for oneself." But most people don't want that kind of freedom. They want soft guarantees. They want structure without sacrifice. They want to be free as long as someone tells them how. But real freedom has no instruction manual. It's not a retirement plan, it's not a condo on the coast, it's not a checklist of polite pleasures. It's a confrontation, a mirror, a rebirth. The herd cannot survive in this kind of freedom, because the herd survives on certainty, on routine, on collective approval. But the Übermensch, the one who overcomes himself, doesn't follow the herd. He leaves it. He doesn't ask, what am I allowed to do now? He asks, what must I create with the time I have left? The Übermensch does not wait for permission. He does not ask the machine for blessings. He doesn't retire because he never outsourced his purpose to a job in the first place. He is not defined by function, he is defined by will. And that's the invitation you've been avoiding all your life. Not to relax, but to begin. Not to rest, but to rise. Retirement is not the end, it is the challenge. Now that no one is telling you who to be, can you become someone at all? That's what Nietzsche meant when he said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." What is your why? Not the one you were handed, not the one printed on your business card or assigned by society, the one that makes your heart beat harder, the one that whispers to you in quiet moments and screams in moments of truth. That why has been buried under deadlines, spreadsheets, titles, and years of polite performance. But it's still there, waiting. The world doesn't need another retiree, it needs a rebirth. It needs men and women who don't just end their careers, but end their obedience. It needs people who no longer fit in, who no longer belong to the system, who no longer chase applause but chase truth. Because once you awaken, you can't go back. Once you taste freedom, not comfort, not retirement, but true inner freedom, you'll never again accept sedation disguised as peace. The Übermensch is not a man of the future. He is the man who dares to live now. So ask yourself, if you had nothing to prove, no one to impress, and no script to follow, who would you become? This is not the end of your story. This is the first page that was never written for you. There is no final destination, no golden hour where everything aligns, no applause at the end of your obedience. That was the lie. The truth? Life is not waiting for you, it never was. It's been happening every second you postponed it, every time you said not yet, every time you chose safety over soul, comfort over chaos. You didn't delay life. You escaped it. And now you stand at the edge of what's left, asking what it all meant. But meaning doesn't wait for retirement. It doesn't bloom at 65. It's forged in fire, through risk, rebellion, and presence. Nietzsche once said, "Become who you are, not when it's convenient, not when the job ends, but now, while your blood is still warm and your breath still yours." Because freedom is not something they give you, it's something you seize, not in the future, but in this moment. In every moment you dare to stop performing and start being. And yes, it will feel like death at first, the death of who you were told to be. But that death is not the end. It is the beginning of a life not measured by usefulness but by aliveness. You don't need a pension to feel purpose. You don't need a schedule to be whole. You don't need permission to begin. You were never meant to retire. You were meant to awaken. And the moment you stop waiting for freedom is the moment you realize you were always free.